I am going to read you a bedtime story. And by that I mean we're going to start reading the first Witcher book, which is called The Last Wish. I don't remember exactly how the Witcher books came out. I believe that like the order they came out is not exactly the same as the order like the story of The Witcher goes chronologically. So anyway, this is the first one. This is the one you're supposed to read first. So here we go. I'll just start off with one chapter and see how it goes. Chapter 1. The Voice of Reason. She came to him toward morning. She entered very carefully, moving silently, floating through the chamber like a phantom. The only sound was that of her mantle brushing her naked skin. Yet this faint sound was enough to wake the Witcher, or maybe it only tore him from the half-slumber in which he rocked monotonously, as though traveling through fathomless depths, suspended between the seabed and its calm surface amid gently undulating strands of seaweed. He did not move, did not stir. The girl flitted closer, threw off her mantle, and slowly, hesitantly, rested her knee on the edge of the large bed. I don't remember how in-depth this goes. There are definitely sex scenes in the Witcher books. But we'll see how it goes. This part's going to be cut out of what I send to the developers, so we'll be fine. Alright. The girl carefully climbed onto the large bed. He observed her through lowered lashes, still not betraying his wakefulness. The girl carefully climbed onto the bedclothes and onto him, wrapping her thighs around him. Leaning forward on straining arms, she brushed his face with hair that smelled of chamomile. Determined, and as if impatient, she leaned over and touched his eyelids, cheeks, lips with the tips of her... I don't know, should I just say? It's fine. Breasts. He smiled very slowly, delicately, grasping her by the shoulders, and she straightened, escaping his fingers. She was radiant, luminous in the misty brilliance of dawn. He moved, but with pressure from both hands, she forbade him to change position, and with a light but decisive movement of her hips, demanded a response. He responded. She no longer backed away from his hands. She threw her head back, shook her hair. Her skin was cool and surprisingly smooth. Her eyes, glimpsed when her face came close to his, were huge and dark as the eyes of a water nymph. Rocked, he sank into a sea of chamomile as it grew agitated and seethed. Next chapter. The Witcher. Later, it was said that the man came from the north, from Roper's Lake. He came on foot, leading his laden horse by the bridle. It was late afternoon, and the ropers, saddlers, and tanners' stalls were already closed, the street empty. It was hot, but the man had a black coat thrown over his shoulders. He drew attention to himself. Oh, are we thirsty now, Ren? I'm gonna have a hydrate, thank you. He stopped in front of the old Naracourt Inn, stood there for a moment, listened to the hubbub of voices. As usual at this hour, it was full of people. The stranger did not enter the old Naracourt. Hang on, I'm gonna turn off my ring light. My tracking might not be as good, but it'll be a little bit calmer for me. Here we go. Oh, this is better for my eyes. The stranger did not enter the old Naracourt. He pulled his horse farther down the street to another tavern, a smaller one, called the Fox. Not enjoying the best of reputations, it was almost empty. The innkeeper raised his head above a barrel of pickled cucumbers and measured the man with his gaze. The outsider, still in his coat, stood stiffly in front of the counter, motionless and silent. "What will it be?" "Beer," said the stranger. His voice was unpleasant. The innkeeper wiped his hands on his canvas apron and filled a chipped earthenware tankard. The stranger was not old, but his hair was almost entirely white. Beneath his coat, he wore a worn leather jerkin laced up at the neck and shoulders. As he took off his coat, those around him noticed that he carried a sword. Not something unusual in itself. Nearly every man in Wyzim carried a weapon, but no one carried a sword strapped to his back as if it were a bow or a quiver. The stranger did not sit at the table with the few other guests. He remained standing at the counter, piercing the innkeeper with his gaze. He drew from the tankard. "I'm looking for a room for the night." There's none, grunted the innkeeper, looking at the guest's boots, dusty and dirty. Ask at the old Naracourt. I would rather stay here. There is none. The innkeeper finally recognized the stranger's accent. He was Rivian. I'll pay. The outsider spoke quietly, as if unsure, and the whole nasty affair began. A pock-marked beanpole of a man who, from the moment the outsider had entered, had not taken his gloomy eyes from him, got up and approached the counter. 2 of his companions rose behind him, no more than 2 paces away. There's no room to be had, you Rivian vagabond, rasped the pock-marked man, standing right next to the outsider. We don't need people like you in Wyzim. This is a decent town. The outsider took his tankard and moved away. He glanced at the innkeeper, who avoided his eyes. It did not even occur to him to defend the Rivian. After all, who liked Rivians? All Rivians are thieves, the pockmarked man went on, his breath smelling of beer, garlic, and anger. Do you hear me, you bastard? He can't hear you. His ears are full of shit, said one of the men with him, and the second man cackled. Pay and leave, yelled the pocked man. Only now did the Rivian look at him. I'll finish my beer. We'll give you a hand, the pockmarked man hissed. He knocked the tankard from the stranger's hand, and simultaneously grabbing him by the shoulder, dug his fingers into the leather strap which ran diagonally across the outsider's chest. One of the men behind him raised a fist to strike. The outsider curled up on the spot, throwing the pockmarked man off balance. The sword hissed in its sheath and glistened briefly in the dim light. The place seethed. There was a scream, and one of the few remaining customers tumbled toward the exit. A chair fell with a crash, and earthenware smacked hollowly against the floor. The innkeeper, his lips trembling, looked at the horribly slashed face of the pocked man, who, clinging with his fingers to the edge of the counter, was slowly sinking from sight. Oh. I'll get the title. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you for reminding me. Should be good now. Okay. The other 2 were lying on the floor, one motionless, the other writhing and convulsing in a dark, spreading puddle. A woman's hysterical scream vibrated in the air, piercing the ears as the innkeeper shuddered, caught his breath, and vomited. The stranger retreated toward the wall, tense and alert. He held the sword in both hands, sweeping the blade through the air. No one moved. Terror, like cold mud, was clear on their faces, paralyzing limbs and blocking throats. 3 guards rushed into the tavern with thuds and clangs. They must have been close by. They had truncheons wound with leather straps at the ready. Truncheons wound with leather straps at the ready, but at the sight of the corpse drew their swords. The Rivian pressed his back against the wall, and with his left hand pulled a dagger from his boot. Throw that down! One of the guards yelled with a trembling voice. Throw that down, you thug! You're coming with us! The second guard kicked aside the table between himself and the Rivian. Go get the man, Tresca! He shouted to the third guard, who had stayed closer to the door. No need, said the stranger, lowering his sword. I'll come by myself. You'll go, you son of a bitch! On the end of a rope, yelled the trembling guard. Throw that sword down, or I'll smash your... hang on. I'll smash your head in. The Rivian straightened. He quickly pinned his blade under his left arm, and with its right hand raised toward the guards, swiftly drew a complicated sign in the air. The clout nails, which studded his tunic from wrist to elbows, flashed. The guards drew back, shielding their faces with their arms. One of the customers sprang up while another darted to the door. The woman screamed again, wild and ear-splitting. I'll come by myself, repeated the stranger in his resounding metallic voice, and the 3 of you will go in front of me. Take me to the Castellan. I don't know the way. Yes, sir, mumbled the guard, dropping his head. He made toward the exit, looking around tentatively. The other 2 guards followed him out backward, hastily. The stranger followed in their tracks, sheathing his sword and dagger. As they passed the tables, the remaining customers hid their faces from the dangerous stranger. Velerad, Castellan of Wyzim, scratched his chin. He was neither superstitious nor faint-hearted, but did not relish the thought of being alone with a white-haired man. At last, he made up his mind. "Leave," he ordered the guards. "You, sit down." "No, not there. Farther away, if you please." The stranger sat down. He no longer carried his sword or black coat. "I am Velerad, a castellan of Wyzem," said Velerad, toying with a heavy mace lying on the table. "And I'm listening. What do you have to say to me, you brigand, before you are thrown into the dungeon? 3 killed in an attempt at spell casting? Not bad at all. Men are impaled for such things at Wyzem. But I'm a just man, so I will listen to you before you are executed. Speak." The Rivian unbuttoned his jerkin and pulled out a wad of white goat leather. "You nail this crossways in taverns," he said quietly. "Is what's written here true?" "Ah," Velerad grunted, looking at the runes etched into the leather. "So that's it, and I didn't guess at once." "Yes, it's true. It's signed by Foltest, king of Temeria, Pontar, and Mahakim, which makes it true. A proclamation is a proclamation, Witcher, but law is law, and I take care of law and order in Wyzem. I will not allow people to be murdered, do you understand?" The Rivian nodded to show he understood. Velerad snorted with anger. "You carry the Witcher's emblem." The stranger reached into his jerkin once more and pulled out a round medallion on a silver chain. It pictured the head of a wolf, bearing its fangs. "And do you have a name?" "Any name will do. It's simply to make conversation easier." "My name is Geralt." "Geralt, then. Of Rivia, I gather from your accent." "Of Rivia." "Right. Do you know what, Geralt? This," Velerad slapped the proclamation, "let it go. It's a serious matter. Many have tried and failed already. This, my friend, is not the same as roughing up a couple of scoundrels." "I know. This is my job, Velerad. And that proclamation offers a 3,000 Oren reward." 3,000. Velerad scowled. "And the princess is a wife, or so the rumors say. Although gracious Foltest has not proclaimed that." "I'm not interested in the princess," Geralt said calmly. He was sitting motionless, his hands on his knees. "Just in the 3,000. "What times," sighed the Castellan. "What foul times! 20 years ago, who would have thought, even in a drunken stupor, that such a profession as a witcher would exist? Itinerant killers of basilisks, traveling slayers of dragons and vodniks. Tell me, Geralt, are you allowed beer in your guild?" "Certainly." Velerad clapped his hands. "Beer!" he called. "And sit closer, Geralt. What do I care?" The beer, when it arrived, was cold and frothy. "Foul times," Velerad muttered, drinking deep from his tankard. "All sorts of filth has sprung up. Mahakam, in the mountains, is teeming with bogeymen. In the past, it was just wolves howling in the woods, but now it's kobolds and brigands wherever you spit. Werewolves or some other vermin. Fairies and rusalkas snatch children from the villages by the hundreds. We have diseases never heard of before. It makes my hair stand on end. And now to top it all off, this." He pushed the wad of leather back across the table. "It's not surprising, Geralt, that you Witcher's services are in demand." "The king's proclamation, Castellan. Do you know the details?" Geralt raised his head. Velerad leaned back in his chair and locked his hands over his stomach. "The details? Yes, I know them. Not firsthand, perhaps, but from a good source." "That's what I want. If you insist, then listen." Velerad drank some beer and lowered his voice. I can't make that voice go any lower. "During the reign of Old Medal, his father, when our gracious king was still prince, Foltest showed us what he was capable of, and he was capable of a great deal. We hoped he would grow out of it, but shortly after his coronation, Foltest surpassed himself, jaw-droppingly. He got his own sister with child. Ada was younger and they were always together, but nobody suspected anything except perhaps the queen. To get to the point, suddenly there is Ada with a huge belly and Foltest talking about getting wed to his sister. The situation was made even more tense because Vizimir of Novigrad wanted his daughter, Dalka, to marry Foltest, and had already sent out his envoys. We had to restrain Foltest from insulting them, and luckily we did, or Vizimir would have torn our insides out. Then, not without Ada's help, for she influenced her brother, we managed to dissuade the boy from a quick wedding. Well, then Ada gave birth. And now listen, because this is where it all starts. Only a few saw what she bore, but one midwife jumped from the tower window to her death, and the other lost her senses and remains dazed to this day. So I gathered that the royal bastard, a girl, was not comely, and she died immediately. No one was in a hurry to tie the umbilical cord, nor did Ada, to her good fortune, survive the birth. But then Foltest stepped in again. Wisdom dictated that the royal bastard should have been burned or buried in the wilderness. Instead, on the order of our gracious king, she was laid to rest in a sarcophagus in the vaults beneath the palace. It's too late for your wisdoms now. Geralt raised his head. One of the knowing ones should have been sent for. You mean those charlatans with the stars on their hats, of course. About 10 of them came running later when it became known what lay in the sarcophagus, and what scrambled out of it at night. Though it didn't start manifesting straight away, oh no. For 7 years after the funeral there was peace. Then one night, it was a full moon. There were screams in the palace, shouting, and commotion. I don't have to tell you, this is your trade and you've read the proclamation. The infant had grown in the coffin, and how? Grown to have incredible teeth. In a word, she became a Striga. Pity you didn't see the corpses as I did. Had you, you'd have taken a great detour to avoid Wyzim. Geralt was silent. Then, as I was saying, Valerad continued, Foltest summoned a whole crowd of sorcerers. They all jabbered at the same time and almost came to blows with those staffs they carry. To beat off dogs, no doubt, once they've been let loose on them. And I think they regularly are. I'm sorry, Geralt, if you have a different opinion of wizards. No doubt you do in your profession, but to me they are swindlers and fools. You witchers inspire greater confidence in men. At least you are more straightforward. Geralt smiled, but he didn't comment. But to this point, the Castellan peered into his tankard and poured more beer for himself and the Rivian. Some of the sorcerer's advice didn't seem so stupid. One suggested burning the Striga together with the palace and the sarcophagus. Another advised chopping her head off. The rest were keen on driving aspen stakes into her body during the day, when the she-devil was asleep in her coffin, worn out by her night's delights. Unfortunately, one, a jester with a pointed hat and a bald pate, a hunchback hermit, argued that it was magic. The spell could be undone and the Striga would turn into Foltest's little daughter. Pretty as a picture. Someone simply had to stay in the crypt throughout the night and that would be that. After which, can you imagine such a fool? He went to the palace for the night. Little of him was left in the morning. Only, I believe, his hat and stick. But Foltest clung to his idea like a burr to a dog's tail. He forbade any attempt to kill the Striga and brought in charlatans from all corners of Wyzim to reverse the spell and turn her into a princess. What colorful company. Twisted women, cripples, dirty, and louse-ridden. It was pitiful. They went ahead and cast spells, mainly over a bowl and tankard. Of course, some were quickly exposed as frauds by Foltest or the council. Few were even hung on the palisades, but not enough of them. I would have hung them all. I don't suppose I have to say that the Striga, in the meantime, was getting her teeth into all sorts of people, every now and again, and paying no attention to the fraudsters and their spells. Or that Foltest was no longer living in the palace. No one lived there anymore. Valerad paused, drank some beer, and the Witcher waited in silence. I'm gonna also take a sippy sip. And so it's been for 7 years, Geralt, because she was born around 14 years ago. We've had a few other worries, like war with Vizimir of Novigrad, fought for real, understandable reasons, over the border posts, not for some princess or marriage alliance. Foltest sporadically hints at marriage and looks over portraits from neighboring courts, which he then throws down the privy. And every now and then this mania seizes hold of him again, and he sends horsemen out to look for new sorcerers. His promised reward, the 3,000, has attracted any number of cranks, stray knights, even a shepherd known throughout the whole region as a cretin. May he rest in peace. But the Striga is doing well. Every now and again she gets her teeth into someone. You get used to it. And at least those heroes trying to reverse the spell have a use. The beast stuffs herself on the spot and doesn't roam beyond her palace. Foltest has a new palace, of course. Quite a fine one. In 7 years. Geralt raised his head. In 7 years, no one has settled the matter. Well, no. Valerad's gaze penetrated the Witcher. Because the matter can't be settled. We have come to terms with it. especially Foltest, our gracious and beloved ruler, who will keep nailing these proclamations up at crossroads, although there are fewer volunteers now. There was one recently, but he insisted on the 3,000 in advance, so we put him in a sack and threw him in the lake. There is still no shortage of fraudsters, then. No, far from it, the Castellan agreed without taking his eyes off the Witcher. That's why you mustn't demand gold in advance when you go to the palace. If you go. I'll go. It's up to you, but remember my advice. As we're talking of the reward, there's been word recently about the second part of it. I mentioned it to you, the princess for a wife. I don't know who made it up, but if the Striga looks the way they say, then it's an exceptionally grim joke. Nevertheless, there's been no lack of fools racing to the palace for the chance of joining the royal family. 2 apprentice shoemakers to be precise. Why are shoemakers so foolish, Geralt? I don't know. And Witcher's Castellan, have they tried? There were a few, but when they heard the spell was to be lifted and the Striga wasn't to be killed, they mostly shrugged and left. And that's one of the few reasons why my esteem for Witchers has grown, Geralt. And no one came along younger than you. And one came along younger than you. I forget his name. He gave it all. He tried. And the fanged princess spread his entrails over a considerable distance. Geralt nodded. That was all of them? There was another. Velerad remained silent for a while, and the Witcher didn't urge him on. Yes, the Castellan said finally. There was one more. At first, when Foltest threatened him with the noose if he killed or harmed the Striga, he laughed and started packing his belongings. But then, Velerad leaned across the table, lowered his voice to almost a whisper. Then he undertook the task. You see, Geralt, there are some wise men in Wisem, in high positions, who have had enough of this whole affair. Rumor has it these men persuaded the Witcher, in secret, not to fuss around with spells, but to batter the Striga to death, and tell the king the spell had failed. That his dear daughter had been killed in self-defense. An accident at work. The king, of course, would be furious and refuse to pay an Orin in reward, but that would be the end to it. The witty Witcher replied we could chase Strigas ourselves for nothing. Well, what could we do? We collected money, bargained, but nothing came of it. Geralt raised his eyebrows. Nothing, repeated Velerad. The Witcher didn't want to try that first night. He trudged around, lay in wait, wandered about the neighborhood. Finally, they say, he saw the Striga in action. She does not clamber from her crypt just to stretch her legs. He saw her and scampered that night. Without a word. Geralt's expression changed a little, in what was probably supposed to be a smile. Those wise men, he said. They still have the money, no doubt. Witchers don't take payment in advance. No doubt they still do, said Velerad. Does the rumor say how much they offer? Velerad bared his teeth in a smile. Some say 800. Geralt shook his head. Others, murmured the Castellan, talk of 1,000. Not much when you bear in mind that rumor likes to exaggerate, and the king is offering 3,000. Don't forget about the betrothal, Velerad mocked. What are you talking about? It's obvious you won't get the 3,000. How's it obvious? Velerad thumped the table. Geralt, do not spoil my impression of Witchers. This has been going on for more than 7 years. The Striga is finishing up to 50 people a year. Fewer now people are avoiding the palace. Oh no, my friend, I believe in magic. I've seen a great deal, and I believe to a certain extent in the abilities of wizards and witchers. But all this nonsense about lifting the spell was made up by a hunchback snotty old man who'd lost his mind on his hermit's diet. It's nonsense which no one but Foltest believes. Ada gave birth to a Striga because she slept with her brother. That is the truth, and no spell will help. Now the Striga devours people, as Strigas do. She has to be killed, and that is that. Listen, 2 years ago, peasants from some godforsaken hole named Mahakam were plagued by a dragon devouring their sheep. They set out together, battered the dragon to death with stanchions, and did not even think it worth boasting about. But we in Wisem are waiting for a miracle and bolting our doors every full moon, or tying our criminals to a stake in front of the palace, praying the beast stuffs herself and returns to her sarcophagus. Not a bad method, the Witcher smiled. Are there fewer criminals? Not a bit of it. Which way to this palace? The new one. I will take you myself. And what about the wise men's suggestion? Castellan, said Geralt. Why act in haste? After all, I really could have an accident at work, irrespective of my intentions. Just in case, the wise men should be thinking about how to save me from the king's anger, and get those 1,500 orens, of which the rumor speaks, ready. It was to be 1,000. No, Lord Velerad, the Witcher said categorically. The Witcher who was offered 1,000 ran at the mere sight of the Striga without bargaining, so the risk is greater than 1,000. Whether it is greater than 1.5 remains to be seen. Of course, I will say goodbye beforehand. Geralt. Velerad scratched his head. 1,200? No, this isn't an easy task. The king is offering 3, and sometimes it's easier to lift a spell than to kill. But one of my predecessors would have done so or killed the Striga if it were this simple. You think they let themselves be devoured out of fear of the king? Then Witcher. Velerad nodded wistfully. Our agreement stands. But a word of advice. Say nothing to the king about the danger of an accident at work. We're on to part 3. Drink some water. Foltest was slim and had a too pretty face. He was under 40, the Witcher thought. The king was sitting on a dwarf armchair carved from black wood, his legs stretched out toward the hearth, where 2 dogs were warming themselves. Next to him on a chest sat an older, powerfully built man with a beard. Behind the king stood another man, richly dressed and with a proud look on his face, a magnate. A Witcher from Merivia, said the king after the moment's silence which fell after Velerad's introduction. Oxenal, thank you for the follow. I appreciate you. Yes, Your Majesty. Geralt lowers his head. What made your hair so gray? Magic. I can see that you are not old. That was a joke. Say nothing. You've had a fair amount of experience, I dare presume? Yes, Your Majesty. I would love to hear about it. Geralt bowed even lower. Your Majesty, you know our code of practice forbids us to speak of our works. A convenient code, which are very convenient. But tell me, have you had anything to do with Spriggans? Yes. Vampires? Leshies? Those two. Foltest hesitated. Strigas? Geralt raised his head, looking the king in the eyes. Yes. Foltest turned his head away. Velerad! Yes, Your Gracious Majesty. Have you given him the details? Yes, Your Gracious Majesty. He says the spell cast on the princess can be reversed. I have known that for a long time. How, Witcher? Oh, of course, I forget your code of practice. All right, I will make one small comment. Several witches have been here already. Velerad, you have told him? Good. So I know that your specialty is to kill rather than to reverse spells. This isn't an option. If one hair falls from my daughter's head, your head will be on the block. That is all. Ostrit, Lord Segolin, stay and give him all the information he requires. Witchers always ask a lot of questions. Feed him and let him stay in the palace. He is not to drift from tavern to tavern. The king rose, whistled to his dogs, and made his way to the door, scattering the straw covering the chamber floor. At the door he paused. If you succeed, Witcher, the reward is yours. Maybe I will add something if you do well. Of course, the nonsense spread by common folk about marrying the princess carries not a word of truth. I am sure you don't believe I would give my daughter's hand to a stranger. No, Your Majesty, I don't. Good. That shows you have some wisdom. Foltest left, closing the door behind him. Velerad and the magnate, who had been standing all the while, immediately sat at the table. The Castellan finished the king's half-full cup, peered into the jug, and cursed. Ostrit, who took Foltest's chair, scowled at the Witcher while he stroked the caved armrests. Segolin, the bearded man, nodded at Geralt. Thank you for the hydrate and the stretch.
Well, looks like it's time to stretch.
Thank you for the hydrate and the stretch. Do sit, Witcher, do sit. Supper will soon be served. What would you like to know? Castellan Velerad has probably already told you everything. I know him. He has sooner told you too much than too little. Only a few questions. Ask. The Castellan said that, after the Striga's appearance, the king called up many knowing ones. Excuse me. That's right, but don't say Striga, say princess. Makes it easier to avoid making a mistake in the king's presence and any unpleasant consequences. And any consequent unpleasantness. Was there anyone well known among the knowing ones? Anyone famous? There were such, then and later. I don't remember the names. Do you, Lord Ostrit? I don't recall, said the magnate. But I know some of them enjoyed fame and recognition. There was much talk of it. Were they in agreement that the spell can be lifted? They were far from in any agreement, Segulin smiled, on any subject. But such an opinion was expressed. It was supposed to be simple, not even requiring magical abilities. As I understand it, it would suffice for someone to spend the night, from sunset to the third crowing of the cock, by the sarcophagus. Simple indeed, snorted Velerad. I would like to hear a description of the princess. Velerad leapt up from his chair. The princess looks like a striga, he yelled. Like the most strigish striga I've ever heard of. Her Royal Highness, the cursed royal bastard, is 4 cubits high. Shaped like a barrel of beer, has a maw which stretches from ear to ear and is full of dagger-like teeth. Has red eyes and a red mop of hair. Her paws, with claws like a wild cat's, hang down to the ground. I'm surprised we've yet to send her likeness of friendly courts. The princess played choker is already 14. Time to think of giving her hand to a prince in marriage. Hold on, Velerad. Ostrit frowned, glancing at the door. Segulin smiled faintly. The description, though vivid, is reasonably accurate. And that's what you wanted, isn't it, Witcher? Velerad didn't mention that the princess moves with incredible speed and is far stronger for her height and build than one would expect. And she is 14 years old, if that is of any importance. It is, said the Witcher. Do the attacks on people only occur during the full moon? Yes, replied Segulin. If she attacks beyond the old palace, within the palace walls, people always die, irrespective of the moon's phase. But she only ventures out during the full moon, and not always then. Has there ever been even one attack during the day? No. Does she always devour her victims? Velerad spat vehemently on the straw. Come on, Geralt, it'll be supper soon. Pish! Devours, takes a bite, leaves a side, it varies. According to her mood, no doubt. She only bit the head from one, gutted a couple, and a few more she picked clean to the bone. Sucked them dry, you could say. Damned mothers! Careful, Velerad, snarled Ostrit. Say what you want about the Striga, but do not insult Ada in front of me, as you would not dare in the king's presence. Has anyone she's attacked survived? The Witcher asked, apparently paying no special attention to the magnate's outburst. Segulin and Ostrit looked at each other. Cody the Coyote, hello! I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well also. Yes, said the bearded man. At the very beginning, 7 years ago, she threw herself at 2 soldiers standing guard over the crypt. One escaped. And then, interrupted Velerad, there was another! The miller she attacked near the town, you remember? Okay, we will probably read this next part that's like kind of chapter 4. We'll see kind of where it ends and if we want to keep going or if we want to end there. But we will go for a little bit more. The following day, late in the evening, the miller was brought to the small chamber above the guardhouse allocated to the Witcher. He was led in by a soldier in a hooded coat. The conversation did not yield any significant results. The miller was terrified. He mumbled and stammered, and his scars told the Witcher more than he did. The Striga could open her jaws impressively wide and had extremely sharp teeth, including very long upper fangs. 4 of them, 2 on each side. Her claws were sharper than a wildcat's, but less curved. And it was only because of that the miller had managed to tear himself away. Having finished his examination, Geralt nodded to the miller and soldier, dismissing them. The soldier pushed past the peasant through the door and lowered his hood. It was Foltest himself. Hold on. Confused. The soldier pushed the peasant through the door and lowered his hood. Alright, I'm a little confused, but that's fine. Sit. Do not get up, said the king. This visit is unofficial. Are you happy with the interview? I heard you were at the palace this morning. Yes, your majesty. When will you set about your task? It is 4 days until the full moon. After that. You prefer to have a look at her yourself beforehand. There is no need, but having had her fill the princess will be less active. Striga, Master Witcher, Striga. Let us not play at diplomacy. She will be a princess afterward, and that is what I have come to talk about. Answer me unofficially, briefly and clearly. Will it work or not? Don't hide behind your code. Geralt rubbed his brow. I confirm, your majesty, that the spell might be reversed. and unless I am mistaken, it can be done by spending the night at the palace. The third crowing of the cock, as long as it catches the Striga outside her sarcophagus, will end the spell. That is what is usually done with Strigas. So simple. It is not simple. First, you have to survive the night. Then there are exceptions to the rule. For example, not 1 night, but 3 consecutively. There are also cases which are, well, hopeless. Yes, Foltest bristled. I keep hearing that from some people. Kill the monster because it's an incurable case. Master Witcher, I'm sure they've already spoken to you, am I right? Hack the man-eater to death without any more fuss. At the beginning, and tell the king nothing else could be done. I won't pay, but they will. Very convenient and cheap, because the king will order the Witcher beheaded or hanged, and the gold will remain in their pockets. The king unconditionally orders the Witcher to be beheaded, Geralt grimaced. Foltest looked at the Rivian in the eyes for a long while. The king does not know, he finally said, but the Witcher should bear such an eventuality in mind. Geralt was silent for a moment. I intend to do what is in my power, he said, but if it goes badly, I will defend my life. Your Majesty, you must also be prepared for such an eventuality. Foltest got up. You do not understand me. It's obvious that you'll kill her if it becomes necessary, whether I like it or not, because otherwise she'll kill you, surely and inevitably. I won't punish anyone who kills her in self-defense, but I will not allow her to be killed without trying to save her. There have already been attempts to set fire to the old palace. They shot at her with arrows, dug traps, and set traps and snares, until I hung a few of her attackers. But that is not the point, Witcher. Listen. I'm listening. After the third crowing of the cock, there will be no Striga, if I understand correctly. What will there be? If all goes well, a 14-year-old girl, with red eyes, crocodile's teeth, a normal 14-year-old, except that, well, physically. I see. Then mentally, every day a bucket of blood for breakfast, a little girl's thigh. No, mentally there is no telling. On the level, I think, of a 3 or 4-year-old child. She'll require loving care for a long time. That's obvious. Witcher? I'm listening. Can it happen to her again? Later on? Geralt was silent. Aha, said the king. It can. And what then? Should she die after a long swoon lasting several days, her body will have to be burned. Quickly. Foltest grew gloomy. I do not think it will come to that, added Geralt. Just to be sure, I will give you some instructions, your majesty, to lessen the danger. Right now? It is not too soon, Master Witcher. And if... Right now, interrupted the Rivian. Many things may happen, your majesty. It could be that you'll find a princess in the morning, the spell already broken in my corpse. Even so, despite my permission to defend yourself, which it seems wasn't that important to you, this is a serious matter, your majesty. The risk is great. That is why you must listen. The princess should always wear a sapphire around her neck, or better, an inclusion on a silver chain, day and night. What is an inclusion? A sapphire with a pocket of air trapped within the stone. Aside from that, every now and then you should burn juniper, broom, and aspen in the fireplace of her chamber. Foltest grew pensive. I thank you for your advice, Witcher. I will pay heed if... And now listen to me carefully. If you find the case is hopeless, kill her. If you undo the spell but the girl is not... normal. If you have a shadow of a doubt as to whether you have been entirely successful, kill her. Do not worry, you have nothing to fear from me. I'll shout at you in front of the others, banish you from the palace and the town, nothing more. Of course I won't give you the reward, but maybe you'll manage to negotiate something from you know who. They were both quiet for a while. Geralt. For the first time, Foltest called the Witcher by his name. Yes. How much truth is there in the rumor that the child is as she is because Ada was my sister? Not much. A spell has to be cast, they don't cast themselves. But I think your congress with your sister was the reason the spell was cast. And this is the result. As I thought. That is what some of the knowing ones said, although not all of them. Geralt, where do such things come from? Spells? Magic? I don't know, your majesty. Knowing one study the causes of such phenomena. For us Witchers, the knowledge that concentrated will can... For us Witchers, the knowledge that concentrated will can cause such phenomena is enough. That, and the knowledge to fight them. And kill them? Usually. Besides, that is what we're usually paid for. Only a few demand the reversal of spells, your majesty. As a rule, people simply want to defend themselves from danger. If the monster has men on its conscience, then revenge can also come into play. The king got up, took a few paces across the chamber, and stopped in front of the Witcher's sword hanging on the wall. With this, he asked, not looking at Geralt. No, that is for men. So I heard. Do you know what, Geralt? I'm going to the crypt with you. Out of the question. Foltest turns. His eyes glinted. Do you know, sorcerer, that I have not seen her? Neither after she was born nor later. I was afraid. I may never see her, am I not right? At least I have the right to see my daughter while you're murdering her. I repeat, it's out of the question. It is certain death for me as well as you. If my attention, my will falters. No, your majesty. Foltest turned away, started toward the door. For a moment, Geralt thought he would leave without a word, without a parting gesture, but the king stopped and looked at him. You inspire trust, he said. Although I know what a rogue you are, I was told what happened at the tavern. I'm sure you killed those thugs solely for word to spread, to shock people, to shock me. It's obvious that you could have dealt with them without killing. I'm afraid I'll never know whether you're going to save my daughter or to kill her. But I agree to it. I have to agree. Do you know why? Geralt did not reply. Because I think, said the king, I think that she is suffering. Am I not right? The Witcher fixed his penetrating eyes on the king. He didn't confirm it, didn't nod, didn't make the slightest gesture. But Foltest knew. He knew the answer. Alright, we'll do this last one here, and then we will call it. One more chapter. Geralt looked out from the palace window for the last time. Dusk was falling rapidly. Beyond the lake, the distant lights of Wyzim twinkled. There was a wilderness around the old palace, a strip of no man's land with which, over 7 years, the town had cut itself off from this dangerous place, leaving nothing but a few ruins, rotten beams, and the remains of a gap-toothed palisade, which had obviously not been worth dismantling and moving. As far away as possible, at the opposite end of the settlement, the king had built his new residence. The stout tower of his new palace loomed black in the distance, against the darkening blue of the sky. In one of the empty, plundered chambers, the Witcher returned to the dusty table at which he was preparing, calmly and meticulously. He knew he had plenty of time. The Striga would not leave her crypt before midnight. On the table in front of him, he had a small chest with metal fittings. He opened it. Inside, packed tightly in compartments lined with dried grass, stood small vials of dark glass. The Witcher removed 3. From the floor, he picked up an oblong packet, thickly wrapped in sheepskins and fastened with a leather strap. He unwrapped it and pulled out a sword with an elaborate hilt, in a black, shiny scabbard covered with rows of runic signs and symbols. He drew the blade, which lit up with a pure shine of mirror-like brightness. It was pure silver. Geralt whispered an incantation and drank, one after another, the contents of 2 vials, placing his left hand on the blade of the sword after each sip. Then, wrapping himself tightly in his black cloak, he sat down on the floor. There were no chairs in the chamber, or in the rest of the palace. He sat motionless, his eyes closed. His breathing, at first even, suddenly quickened, became rasping and tense, and then stopped completely. The mixture which helped the Witcher gain full control of his body was chiefly made up of veratrum, stramonium, hawthorn, and spurge. The other ingredients had no name in any human language. For anyone who was not, like Geralt, inured to it from his childhood, it would have been lethal poison. The Witcher turned his head abruptly. In the silence, his hearing, sharpened beyond measure, easily picked out a rustle of footsteps through the courtyard overgrown with stinging nettles. It could not be the Striga, the steps were too light. Geralt threw his sword across his back, hid his bundle in the hearth of the ruined chimney place, and, silent as a bat, ran downstairs. It was still light enough in the courtyard for the approaching man to see the Witcher's face. The man, Ostrit, backed away abruptly. An involuntary grimace of terror and repulsion contorted his lips. The Witcher smiled wryly. He knew what he looked like. After drinking a mixture of banewort, monkshood, and eyebright, the face takes on the color of chalk, and the pupils fill the entire iris. But the mixture enables one to see in the deepest darkness, and this is what Geralt wanted. Ostrit quickly regained control. You look as if you are already a corpse, Witcher, he said. From fear, no doubt. Don't be afraid, I bring you reprieve. The Witcher did not reply. Don't you hear what I say, you Rivian charlatan? You're saved and rich. Ostrit hefted a sizable purse in his hand and threw at Geralt's feet. 1,000 orens. Take this, get on your horse, and get out of here. The Rivian still said nothing. Don't gawp at me, Ostret raised his voice. And don't waste my time. I have no intention of standing here until midnight. Don't you understand? I do not wish you to undo the spell. No, you haven't guessed. I am not in league with Velorad Segolin. I don't want you to kill her. You are simply to leave. Everything is to stay as it is. The Witcher did not move. He did not want the magnet to realize how fast his movements and reactions now were. It was quickly growing dark. A relief, as even the semi-darkness of dusk was too bright for his dilated pupils. And why, sir, is everything to remain as it is? He asked, trying to enunciate each word slowly. Now that, Ostret raised his head proudly, should really be of damn little concern to you. And what if I already know? Go on. It would be easier to remove Foltest from the throne if the Striga frightens the people even more. And if the royal madness completely disgusts both Magnet and Comet folk. Am I right? I came here by way of Redania and Novigrad. There's much talk that there are those in Wyzim who look to King Vizimir as their savior and true monarch. 1 second, guys. But I, Lord Ostret, do not care about politics or the succession to thrones or revolutions and palaces. I am here to accomplish my task. Have you never heard of a sense of responsibility and plain honesty? About professional ethics? Careful to whom you speak, you vagabond. Ostret yelled furiously, placing his hand on the hilt of his sword. I have had enough of this. I am not accustomed to hold such discussions. Look at you! Ethics, codes of practice, morality. Who are you to talk? A brigand who's barely arrived before he even starts murdering men? Who bends double to Foltest and behind his back bargains with Velorad like a hired thug? And you dare to turn your nose up at me, you serf? Play at being a knowing one? A magician, you scheming Witcher? Be gone before I run the flat of my sword across your gob. The Witcher did not stir. He stood calmly. You'd better leave, Lord Ostret, he said. It's growing dark. Ostret took a step back, drew his sword in a flash. You asked for this, you sorcerer! I'll kill you! Your tricks won't help you, I carry a turtle stone! Geralt smiled. The reputation of Turtlestone was as mistaken as it was popular, but the Witcher was not going to lose his strength at spells, much less expose his silver sword to contact with Ostret's blade. He dived under the whirling blade and with the heel of his hand and his silver-studded cuff, hit him in the temple.